What you are looking at right now is one of the biggest issues that our 3D artists facing when they are trying to texture their 3D models. The vast majority of artists are using seamless PBR textures for texturing because these textures are convenient, they are realistic, and they are seamless. And even though they are seamless and they have no hard transitions once you tile them, there is still some repetition going on which looks very unnatural. So in this video I'm gonna show you how we can actually avoid this and how to turn this into this. So the first thing that we can do to actually hide this repetition is to add some level of randomness. Now, because the procedural textures are the best source of randomness, we can start by adding a noise texture. So what we want to do right now is to actually randomize the color with this noise texture, which is the source of randomness that we are going to use to actually hide this repetition. So let's add a hue saturation node, plug it to the base color, and now we want to randomize the value and the hue. So let's bring the noise texture and let's plug the factor into the value. Now the contrast between the black and white is pretty high. As you can see, we have big differences between the bright and black areas. So we can actually reduce this by adding a contrast node, and then if we bring down the contrast, it will actually slowly decrease the contrast between the black and white values. This way we will actually keep the value variation without actually having pure black and pure white spots on the texture. Now you can play with the scale of the texture, you can play with the detail, and you can also play with the roughness to add more crisp detail. So this is how the texture looks before, and this is how the texture looks after. So what we can do to actually bring this even further is that we can duplicate this node setup, we can scale down the texture, we can bring down the detail and the roughness, and we can actually connect the second node group to the hue. By default, this doesn't really look like a grass, so we need to bring the brightness a little bit down. We also need to decrease the contrast a little bit. So now we can see that the green is actually shifting towards yellow, and here the green is actually shifting towards blue. So we have not only the variation in the value, but we have also the variation in the color. And what I actually like to do is to actually take the first noise texture and change the mode to multifractal. This way you can add actually more depth. This way you can actually add more definition, and you can randomize the appearance even more. Now we can still see the repetition, but I think we hide like 40% of the repetition, which I think is pretty cool. Now we can keep randomizing the base color even further, but if we truly want to randomize the texture, we need to play with the mapping setup. If we now view the base color, you can basically see that we tiled the texture 5 times, so we have 5 by 5 tile pattern here. What we want to do is to actually randomize the rotation of each tile. If we try to play with the Z rotation, you can see that we are rotating all the tiles together, and this is not what we want. We want to actually rotate each tile separately. So what we can do is we can add a vector math, plug it after the mapping, and then we can set the operation to fraction. And now you can see that we have a coordinate for each tile, and we can now work with each individual tile separately, which means that we can actually randomize each tile. So now what we want to do is we want to add some source of randomness. And again, the best source of randomness are procedural textures. This time we want to add a brick texture, because this texture actually works the best in this scenario. So let's set the factor to 0, let's set the scale to 1. And now we can see that we have basically again the 5 by 5 tile texture. But what's important more is that we have these white and black colors randomized across this brick texture, and we will use that to actually drive the Z rotation of this material. So let's set the mortar size to 0, and let's actually change this color to black. So now we are basically using the full range between the white and black. And before we actually connect this color to the rotation socket, we need to actually determine on which axis we want to rotate. In this case, we want to rotate on the Z axis, so we're gonna add a separate XYZ. We will connect the color output of the brick texture to the vector, and because we want the Z component, we will connect the Z to the rotation. And now we can see that we have a randomized rotation for each tile. So if we now view the material, you can see that the texture right now is fully randomized and the repetition pattern is almost gone. So now we got rid of the tiling, which is perfect. But now we have to face the new issue, and that is that the texture is no more seamless. Because as we apply the random rotation to each tile is rotated differently, which means that now we have to deal with these hard transitions that appears. And there is actually a pretty easy way how to fix this. If you have a node wrangler enabled, just select the brick texture and press Ctrl T on your keyboard. This will add the mapping node and the texture coordinate node. And what we want to do in order to remove these hard transitions is to actually randomize the mapping of the brick texture. So let's move these nodes and let's add a mix RGB node. Plug it between the mapping and the brick texture, change the blend mode to linear light. Now we again need to add a texture to randomize the mapping. So again, we will add a noise texture. We can change the roughness a little bit, we can change the scale to 10. And now we can connect the factor to the second socket, and if you slowly bring the factor up, you will see that the noise texture is actually randomizing the brick texture, which means that instead of these even tiles, as you can see that we basically randomize the brick shapes, which means that we actually randomize the coordinate system. And yes, there will still be some hard transitions between the tiles, but if you zoom out a little bit, they will become basically unnoticeable. Now we can add a value node, you can connect it to the scale of the brick texture, and you can connect it to the mapping scale. And also to the textures that are randomizing the hue and the value. And now if you want to change the scale of your texture, you will just adjust this value, and you will still have randomized texture without any repetition. If you found this video helpful, subscribe to my YouTube channel, follow me on social media, and also check out my other videos that might help you to achieve better renders. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next video.